All right, let's get started. It's been not a week since we last met. It's been, I guess, 3 weeks now, or this is the third Wednesday, and my apologies for that. If you've been living under a rock, the rumors are true. Yeah, you can go ahead and pull that. I did, in fact, contract COVID-19. I can tell you it is, for me, it was everything it was cracked up to be. I was very, very ill. I think I ran a fever for around 10 days and got up to 104 several times. Now, I do have immune system issues. I thought that, and I still think, actually, that they were maybe not as bad as what I initially thought. In 2014, I got meningitis, and it kind of spun my immune system out of control. And from that point on, for the rest of 2014, I was really ill. I struggled with a lot of different illnesses, hoping that COVID didn't do that to me. But whether it was immuno-related or not, it was not a lot of fun. But I am back, feeling good, feeling great. Not perfect, but we're getting there. I feel really good until I try to do something that is like that requires any amount of physical exertion, and then I realize, like, wow, I still have a lot of stamina that I need to gain back. I went grocery shopping, and felt like I ran a marathon afterwards. It was awesome. But we're back. We're back in action, at least for the time being. I did hear today that in Tarrant County there were over 2,100 new cases of COVID-19. Statistically not awesome for us, but we'll see what happens. We're keeping a very close eye on what's happening out in the community. As for right now, we did, I think already post on social media. We will be, again, just down to one service on Sunday, but we will be meeting 9 o'clock. And for those of you out there who feel safe for coming, we'd love to have you. If you'd rather stream from at home, we fully understand and in supportive of that. It will be live streaming, so we'll be rocking and rolling. Yes? Where's my thing? My nose? My nose ring? So she's asking where my nose ring is online. You know, I figured this is such a dignified crowd that I would flip it up. Yeah, so it's actually in my nose right now. You can't see it. Yeah. Yeah, well, and that was part of the motivation for having it, is I knew I could hide it for all of the sensitive minds out there. No, you got it. That would be a cool trick, but it would also mean that like not much was holding it up there, so wouldn't be super effective. Yeah, you'll see it out occasionally, but I thought for tonight, first run back. We've had enough distractions as is. Let me just say to you, and for those of you out there, I have not, in the years that I've been teaching, preaching here, I've not faced more difficulty than I have for this class. And I thought a lot about that this week and over the last several weeks, that I cannot in my mind think of another topic that I believe the enemy of God desires us to talk about less than this one. And the reason I say that is because, and I'm not a spiritual alarmist, for those of you who know me, I'm not big into, kind of over-the-top signs and all that stuff, but the enemy's primary goal is to steal, kill, and destroy, to deceive God's people, to deceive the world. And there is nothing more deceptive or that has more potential for deception than the so-called Christian cults. In other words, what I mean by that is that for your average Christian, you are far less likely to be swept away by Hinduism than you are, say, Mormonism. And in fact, actually, statistically speaking, in the Southern Baptist denomination, which we are a part of, whether some of you know that or not, we say we're Baptist, we're just not mad about it. We are more likely to be proselytized and drawn away by Mormons than any other religious group in the world. They are the number one proselytizing group towards our denomination. Now, why is that? Because they have an incredibly high value system for family, for parenting. In fact, they partnered with James Dobson, for those of you who are unaware of that, several years ago because of the Focus on the Family initiative. And that's how they attract people. It's not their theology. Their theology is, quite frankly, very strange. We're going to talk about that in several weeks. But it's very, very, and I say this with the utmost respect, bizarre. It's just some bizarre things that they teach and believe. It's not the theology that wins people over. It is their emphasis on family. And so I believe that of all the topics that the church, that Christians could be discussing, could be growing in, this particular topic is the one that Satan desires us to talk about the least. Because it is the one that of all the topics has the most potential to lead God's people astray. And I'm not saying that I think that the devil gave me COVID-19 or anything like that at all, but I just find it very strange that in all of the time I have taught classes, this one has just really, really had a lot of opposition. Of course, we met one time before I got sick. Now I'm back, but we're facing what looks like is probably going to be another shutdown economically. And I hope that's not the case. And we've already made the decision as a church that unless it is like, people dying in the streets, we're going to give you the option of coming or not coming. The first time that we shut down, we did so because we didn't really know. No one knew what to expect. The numbers and the projections were a lot higher than what they seem to be now. But it is still a threat, and it is still a serious deal. With that being said, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to shut down because nothing else is shut down right now. And so it doesn't really help anything. I went to the grocery store before this, right? I mean, people go to restaurants and they're going to school still, and there are a lot of things still up and running. And so, even if that happens, we'll talk and weigh the options. Of course, we're, like I said, monitoring it every day, but it just seems like we're facing more and more opposition with this dang class. Hopefully we have a good turnout online. I'm not looking at it right at this moment. I will be kind of touching back and forth to see. In fact, I'll go ahead and open that up while I'm talking, doing the introduction here. But we'll just kind of go with it and see what happens. And, of course, if any of you have questions during this class, ask them. And those of you online, like I said, I'm going to be looking here to make sure that I catch as many of you as I can. Let's get the comments on. There we are. Christina Lewis says, be careful of the boogers when you bring it back down, talking about the nose ring. That's wisdom out there, Christina. Thank you. That's very, very good. You're not wrong. For those of you online as well, let me just say, and out here that missed it, I did not hand out a physical handout tonight. I didn't feel like that was probably a good idea, but if you go to www.thelogicaltheological.com, that's my personal blog site, website. I call it a blog site. I haven't written a blog in a hot minute because of seminary and a lot of other things, but I publish all the Sunday school material and the putting together the New Testament classes on there, as well as now cults, and you can access session 2. That's what we're going to be on tonight. Let's see here. Let's turn this back on. Good. Okay. Any thoughts before we begin? What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go back to session 1. I'm not going to go through all of it in depth, but I do want to kind of cover what we started with, because I realize now it's been 3 weeks since we met, and some of you may not have been here, so I think it's at least helpful to discuss the first part of this. We'll spend the majority of our time on session 2. You will hear me from time to time call these groups new religious movements. And I talked about this the first time we met, that the reason I do that is really out of respect for adherents to these groups. While we obviously reject their theology, their teachings, we believe they're heretical, they're still people. And if our goal is to be a witness to them, to love them with the love of Christ, to demonstrate grace and the gospel to them, then the last thing we want to do is shut them down from hearing anything we have to say by calling them a cult right off the bat. Now, in this class, we can say it because we're all hopefully in agreement here. But you will hear me kind of interchangeably say cult or new religious movement. So I just want to clarify that it's the same thing. It's the same exact thing. We talked about characteristics of these so-called groups, and there are several of them. I'll go through them quickly. Number one, they will have what is called a modern-day living prophet called by God. They will be led by a modern-day living prophet called by God. Why is that important? It's important because if they're modern day and they're alive, then they represent the God they proclaim to represent, and if they represent God, when they speak, it's as if God is speaking. So who can question you, right? I had a conversation with a guy earlier, one of our members of our church, one of our Bible study teachers actually, and he had some upbringing in the Mormon church, and he said, it's rare that you see a comparison of Orthodox Christianity with what the Mormon theology of Jesus is, because they're so different. And I said, well, the reason for that is because it wouldn't be very effective for winning over Mormons, because they have a modern-day living prophet called by God. So if they speak, then that's all that really matters. If it's different than the Bible, it's true, because the prophet said so. If the prophet changes his mind tomorrow and says, God gave me another revelation, then it's different, because he can do that, because that's what kind of drives these groups. It's one of the founding characteristics. In fact, we'll talk about this in several weeks when we get to the LDS group, but a lot of people think about polygamy as kind of one of the fundamental parts of Mormonism. It actually hasn't been a part of their fabric for a very, very long time. The fundamentalist LDS group still practices it, but the LDS group does not practice it at all. In fact, they speak against it. But most people don't know why. Why don't they speak against it? It's because the United States made it illegal. And when the Mormon Church failed to fall in line, there's actually a Supreme Court case against them in which they lost. This is American history. You can look this up. They lost this court case, and the United States government seized control of all of their belongings, including their bank accounts, the temple itself, everything that they owned, because they would not cease and desist. And wouldn't you know it, but 2 days later, Brigham Young, the president at the time, was told by God that we're no longer practicing polygamy. And, of course, the United States left them alone, and they continued to grow. But, these are the things, this is one of the characteristics of cults. It gives them power. It gives them the ability to be malleable, to change the course a little bit. We'll talk about why that's important tonight. But they have a modern-day living prophet called by God. Number two, they have a special message from God not included in the Bible. Now, what I mean by that is that even if you're reading the Bible, some groups have extra books, LDS being one of them. Other groups have the regular Bible. They just read it with this very weird slant that you couldn't get if you just regularly read it. But they're going to have some things in their message that if you just open the Bible and read the Bible as it reads, you would never come away with it. That's one of the big red flags that you can kind of go, something's going on here. Number three, there is an apocalyptic message usually. In other words, the world is coming to an end, so join our group. There's impetus to join the group. Four, there's typically authoritarian leadership, right? There is a structure, and that structure is not to be questioned, primarily because at the top, again, living prophet called by God. Number five, they're very exclusive. Typically have a message that says something like, we're the only ones right, everyone else is wrong. Number six, they promote a legalistic lifestyle. There are very stringent rules that you have to follow in order to be a part of it. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they don't practice holidays, they don't practice birthdays. LDS, there's certain foods you don't eat, there's certain religious garments that you're expected to wear at certain points in your spiritual journey. And number seven, there's a persecution mentality. So every time a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door and they knock on your door, or a Mormon knocks on your door and says, hey, I'm here to tell you about a special message about Jesus Christ. Would you like to hear? And you hopefully don't, but some people do, slam the door in their face. They would go, look, see, we're being persecuted. We must be right. Persecution mentality. Now, I made this case in the first week, and I want to reiterate it because I think it's important. These things, when you lay them all out on a list, you could actually apply them to Christianity, okay? And I don't want that to freak you out. It just means that we are very much in this vein. I would just say that we are not a cult in the bad sense. We're a group of people who identify together according to the truth of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. We also have 2,000 years of very proven historical witness to sort of confirm what we believe, as opposed to some of these other groups, fringe groups that are at best 150 to 200 years old. Time matters. There's a lot of value and lasting power in these groups. We have a modern-day living prophet in Jesus. He is alive. We believe he is alive. The tomb is empty, right? There is a special message from God not included in the Old Testament, which was the scripture at the time. Now, it was there, it just wasn't being read that way by the religious leaders of that time. There's an apocalyptic message. Christ is coming again. There is some level of authoritarian leadership, right? I mean, there is structure. God puts in place elders and pastors and shepherds and so on and so forth. We are exclusive. I mean, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Legalistic lifestyle, read the book of James. There are some things we should not be doing, some things that we should absolutely be doing. And there is a persecution mentality. Jesus said, they hate me. How much more will they hate you? And in the beginning, as I said 3 weeks ago, we were seen as a Jewish cult. This is how Jewish leaders perceived us. Of course, we outgrew the Jewish numbers very quickly, which, again, that's not a case for the validity of Christianity. The case for the validity of Christianity is the empty tomb. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight and how that applies. But these are characteristics of what we would call a new religious movement or a cult. Now, we also talked about what makes a cult seem normal. Because if you're going to be normal, if you're going to succeed, you have to at least appear somewhat normal. If I told you that in order to be a member of City on a Hill, you had to get a face tattoo, I'm guessing our membership is probably pretty low, right? I would hope. If you're willing to join with a face tattoo, come talk to me. We've got some concerns. There's a social capital, in other words, that you have to spend in order to be a part of any group, of any movement that has any sort of specific identity. And the higher that capital, the less likely this group will appear normal, okay? How do groups appear normal? Quickly, I'll just, again, review these, and then we'll jump into tonight's discussion. A group will be seen as normal if a secular group deems them normal. So the IRS gives out tax exemptions called 501c3s. If you have that specific tax exemption, a nonprofit status, a religious nonprofit status, then there's some case to be considered normal, isn't there? I mean, people would look at that group and go, well, it can't be that weird. I mean, the U.S. government recognizes them, right? They've got tax exemption. They're not just some fringe weird group. They're legit. Number two, a group will be seen normal if their members serve or comply in the military. So I made the point that in 1952, prior to 1952, Mormons were seen as socially strange, very weird, very, very weird. They're really not today, right? I mean, Mitt Romney ran for president. There's a lot of normality now. But prior to 1952, Mormons were considered very weird. What happened in 1952 is the majority of World War II vets came home, and a lot of them were Mormons. And so people would, be kind of going about life, maybe have a barbecue. Hey, I was thinking about inviting Joe. You mean that Mormon? Yeah, but he's fine. I served with him overseas. He's a really great guy, and he really loves his family. And he's got like 8 kids. That's a joke. We'll talk about why that's a joke at another time. But this was what happened, right? Coming back into the real world, these guys that had fought together, all of a sudden they were seen kind of a lot more normal. It gave them some staying power. Jehovah's Witnesses, they can not serve in the military. They can do nothing patriotic whatsoever. And so that weirds people out. That raises questions, right? Why can't you be patriotic? Do you also hate apple pie and puppies and Jesus, right? I mean, it's just very weird. It calls into question some of their beliefs. A group will seem normal if they abandon claims to solve common medical problems. Now, it seems pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised, right? Scientology, Christian Science have some those are 2 separate groups, by the way, have very strange teachings regarding just basic medical things. Yes.
I do have a question about Scientology.
Okay.
Do they have a living prophet? Because everything they do is L. Ron Hubbard.
Well, yeah, and so he is dead. And so this brings up a good question. We'll talk more about that group, and let me just say online, that's the one group we will not be talking about online, is the Scientology group. I will say, for those of you who are interested in learning a lot more about their belief system and the potential threat that they pose, there is a really great documentary series put out by Leah Remini, and there's like several seasons now. That's a good one. That's a good one to watch. She's come out of it. She's exposing a lot of things inside of it that are really bad. I cannot imagine the target that is on her from that group. There's a lot of very powerful people involved in that group. And so if you're interested, before we get to it, to talk about it, that's a great documentary to watch. For those of you who have HBO Max, there is another documentary that was just put out not that long ago called The Vow. It's about the NXIVM sex cult. And I call it that because that's precisely what it became. It was a multi-level marketing company that was all about self-help and had a lot of, again, very legitimate people giving a lot of positive feedback regarding it. The Dalai Lama came and participated in something and gave his stamp of approval. I mean, there was a lot of really high-profile people that were on it, and it's rough. It's a good documentary, though. It's a very well-made documentary. There's some language in it, so if bad language is particularly offensive to you, probably don't watch it. But it is really a good scope into what was going on there. I wouldn't call them a cult in this sense. So just to be clear, they don't have it's not quite the same structure. They're not a religious group, but they are a cult in every way other than that. Number 4, a group will be seen normal as if they allow their kids to go to public school. So that's a big one. Seems, again, pretty simple, but that's a big one. Number 5, a group will be seen as normal if they publicly allow access to their worship services. I put on session 1, which is also on that website, pictures of a Kingdom Hall and a Latter-day Saints meeting house. You'll notice in both of those structures, as is typical, there are really not any windows on them, which again just makes people ask questions, doesn't it? I wonder what's going on in there. What are they doing in there? What kind of weird rituals are they up to, right? Those are the 5 marks that will sort of help a group seem normal. And that's pretty much to the extent of what we talked about in that first session. There's a lot more that we certainly could say, but we don't have time because we need to get to our stuff tonight. Let's see here. I'm going to catch up online and see. Let's see here. Okay, looks good. Any questions in here before we continue on? That was session 1. Any clarifying questions or concerns? No? All right. Wow. Silent group. Let's talk about session 2. Let's talk about session 2. Tonight, what we're going to do is, last time we met, we talked about the characteristics that would make a group appear normal. Tonight, we're going to talk about things that would help or allow one of these groups to succeed or fail. So just lasting power. Again, staying power. Number 1 is going to be one that we've already really touched on quite a bit, but I think it's important to say a bit more about it, and that is if they minimize the cultural capital that one has to spend to join the group. This is a big one. I can't overemphasize this enough. Groups will succeed if they can minimize cultural capital. Now, I want you to understand that cultural capital is something that you have to spend, again, for a lot of things, more than you realize. You spend cultural capital every day in ways that you're not even aware of. For example, if you are out and about, let's say you're at a restaurant, and you are talking to someone there. Maybe it's your server, maybe it's just another family person of another table. We're in the South, so we talk to everybody, right? And let's say a person standing there over at the bar says, "Hey, I need to leave the bar. I forgot to lock my car." Where do you think they're from? Boston, right, exactly. Now, interestingly enough, with a linguistics background, I can tell you that this is a really fun dialect to look at. It's a very predictable dialect. You'll notice that they delete the R's, right, off of the words that they pronounce. But there's a rule for this. There's a linguistic rule for this. They only delete the R if it falls in the last part of the syllable of the word. So if you're talking about rappers, they're not going to delete the word because it's at the beginning of the syllable. A fun one is to have someone from Boston say the word carburetor, because they'll delete the first and the second or the third R, but they'll say the second one, carburetor. Right? It's a predictable rule. It's just a lot of fun. All that to say, if you hear someone say that in Texas, they're going to stick out, right? They're just going to stick out. And so for them to have a plain life in the South, they're going to have to figure out how to adopt Southern talk. I'm going to need to hear them say y'all, right? I'm going to need them to have that kind of slower drawl that we all speak with. If you're Australian, for example, living in Texas, people are going like Emma. You're going to hear. I'm just kidding. Let me just say publicly, for once in my life, that Emma is British, and she's from London. And everyone that comes to our church, because of my very consistent joking, thinks that she's actually from Australia. It's a proud moment for me. All that to say that there is a Southern culture, and when you come into the Southern culture and you begin speaking in a way that is not based on Southern culture, you're going to not fit in very well, right? Until you learn how proper brisket is to be made and you eat grits and biscuits and gravy for breakfast, you're just going to seem weird, right? It's just a part of, the same thing would be up north. If we go up north, I went to Oregon one year with my family. I had family that lived up there. And I remember I was like in 10th grade, and I was at a restaurant with my parents. And the waitress said, "What do you have to drink?" I said, "I think I'll have a Coke." And she goes, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I'm not done yet. Do you have Dr. Pepper, or what do you guys have?" And she just understood that to be a Coca-Cola. Because up north, a Coke is a Coke. Here, a Coke is any soda. We don't even say soda. Everywhere you go, there is a level of cultural capital that you have to learn to spend if you're going to, quote-unquote, succeed in that field. There is another kind of culture, and I thought about this week, and this is an interesting one. It's one that I've never considered before, and I don't speak often about politics, but what we're seeing right now in our country, and really in the world, it's more than an American issue, it's a global issue, is the so-called leftist culture. And I'm not talking about people who are more progressive, I'm not talking about church members, I'm talking about loud leftists in the popular media. There is actually a very high cultural capital that you have to spend to be a part of this group. It's very fascinating when you actually think about it, when you apply it from this cult's perspective. So much so that if you fall out of line at all from the way that this group thinks, you're not only not welcomed, but you're canceled, like to the highest degree, right? And what's interesting about this is that typically groups that have high cultural capital like that don't succeed. And actually what we're finding is that these numbers are growing. And here's the interesting thing about this, and this is not just an American issue, it's a global issue. The only way a group with strong, high cultural capital can succeed is if they gain absolute authority over the people that they govern. And again, get away from politics for a minute. Just think about this from a philosophical level, because this is true in cults. Cults will seem successful if they minimize their cultural capital. There are some cults that have very high cultural capital, and what makes them able to do that, to require that, is the absolute authority they have over the people that are a part of that group. If you take away the authority, there's no one to enforce the cultural capital. And so there's no more capital. So it's just a fascinating thing to see. And when we think about this outside of the terms of cults, you can see this in other identity groups as well. And what we will see in that particular group is we will see it either eventually implode, which is typically what happens, or it will get to a point where it has such control over its people that there's no choice, right? And this is, there's a lot more that could be said about that. But if they minimize the cultural capital one has to spend to join the group, they will seem successful, or they will become successful. Any thoughts, questions, concerns on that one? Let's check online. Sorry, we've got to do this. We've got a large group online tonight. Okay, we're good. Number two, and if you have a question in between, just raise your hand. And if their doctrines are not empirically verifiable, they will seem successful. If their doctrines are not empirically verifiable, they will be successful or more successful. Now, what do I mean by that? Everyone know what empirical means? It means something with the five senses. So your sight, touch, taste and smell, which I have been without recently, but it's back. It's back. The five senses and feel. Touch, taste, smell. What am I missing? Touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. Hello, thank you. Brittany always there to save the day. If you can so here, let me give you an example of why this is an important one. In 1988, there was a particular Bible teacher, not a very good one, but a Bible teacher, named Edgar Whisenhunt. Anyone ever heard of Edgar Whisenhunt? Okay. So you remember. Edgar Whisenhunt wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. Yeah, 88 reasons. Now, of course, the big problem with this book was when January 1st, 1989 rolled around. And all of a sudden, was there anyone convinced that Whisenhunt was right? No, because we can empirically verify that their doctrine is false. Now, of course, in 1989, he wrote a book called 89 Reasons the Rapture Will Happen in 1989. And do you know what the 89th reason was? It didn't happen in 1988. You think I'm making this stuff up, you can Amazon this. Doctrines that can be empirically verifiable or not empirically verifiable are much more difficult to contend with, aren't they? So again, let me give you just a for instance, because I said this earlier. Certainly I don't think this, but let's just say, for the sake of the argument, what if someone uncovered the body of Jesus? And it could be like proven that this was the body of Jesus. Like we might as well go start doing something different, right? Have brunch on Sundays. Just enjoy because there's no meaning. If you can verify, in fact, and by the way, this idea of finding Jesus' body, it was so central to the argument for the Jewish population, specifically the Pharisees, during the time of Jesus' life. This was the exact thing that they began spreading throughout the city, is that the apostles came and stole the body of Jesus in the middle of the night to make it appear like he rose again. Now, of course, there's been tons of historical work that's been done on this, and the probability of something like that happening is infinitesimal, right? You would have had to have gone through trained Roman guards. You would have had to have moved a stone that would have been almost immovable. And the reason why I say immovable, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the way stones were rolled in front of tombs is probably unlike most of you imagine. Stones were not spheres. They were not spheres. They were more like cylinders. And they weren't just this big ball that was sort of rolled in front of the mouth of a cave. There was an indention in the ground, a divot in the ground, such that when you pushed the cylinder right into the right spot, it would fall with gravity and lock into that little divot in the ground, making it virtually immovable at that point. So to move a body, being the ragtag bunch of disciples that they were, is just a really bad argument. It's a really, really bad argument. But this is because they knew that without a body, this was something that was going to be very difficult for them to reckon with. How in the world was the stone moved and the body moved? How did this happen? With trained Roman guards, this is a very big problem. And so they began spreading anything they could, whether it was believable or not. Doctrines that are not empirically verifiable will be very difficult to argue with. And so groups that have doctrines in this way are going to have more success. They're going to do better. Any thoughts, questions, concerns on that one? We got 10 of these, so I'm going to move a little quick. But all good for questions. Let's take a look here online again. I know, sorry. Nothing. Online crowd is just very quiet, like y'all. Yes? Yeah. 8.8 and 88. It failed too. That's not shocking. I'm going to be honest, it's not shocking. Sadly. Hey, look, I'm Southern Baptist theologically through and through, but man, we have had some bad efforts before. I'll just say it. Number 3, a group will be successful if it maintains a medium level of tension with society. If it maintains a medium level of tension with society. In other words, what I mean by that is a group needs to be strict. They need to have rules. They just don't need to be too strict, right? Alcohol is a fantastic example within the Southern Baptist, or really within just the church world in general. Apart from our Reformed brothers and sisters, they take a little different approach, but through and through, alcohol is a really great example of this. It's kind of like the whipping child of the Southern Baptist denomination specifically. Name me a chapter and verse where it says that you should never drink alcohol. Don't answer, because it's not there, I promise. But if you were to say, name a chapter and verse where it says not to be drunk, we can do that. That's there. It's clear. Paul's very clear about that, right? So there's medium tension here, isn't there? There's medium tension. Now, we like to put a little more tension on it than probably what is in the Scripture, and frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people who are not convicted by alcohol and have an occasional, glass of wine or whatever. That's between you and God. You're accountable for that. Personally, I do think that it's like kind of the low-hanging fruit where if you're going to appear set apart from the world, that's a pretty easy one. And it's such a big part of worldly living that it's very difficult for me to... there's probably a lot more than could be said than what we have time for tonight, but alcohol drives a large part of culture that I think is very dangerous. I don't drink personally. I haven't drank in well over a decade, and that is not for any other reason than that it has absolutely demolished my family. My father is in prison for life. My mother is a lifelong addict as a result of alcohol. And I do not have by the grace of God, addictive personality. I drank alcohol starting at the age of 9 years old. I had a family that was actually gave me alcohol for the first time at 9 years old at a pool party, which were very frequent in my upbringing. And before I graduated high school, I had alcohol poisoning twice. I got it again after, so I didn't learn my lesson. By 21, actually, I started to stop drinking because it lost its allure. I'd been doing it for so long, and the feeling of rebellion being underage was so much fun. And then when that went away, it was kind of like, I don't know, this is really a lot of that fun. And then I met Jessica, who did not like alcohol, and then eventually came to faith, and through my conversion, being born again, I was able to identify that alcohol has kind of been the key ingredient to the destruction of basically everything I loved growing up. So I don't drink for personal reasons that I don't want to pass down to my children. I believe that it's a generational curse in my family. But all that to say, I'm not going to tell you that the Bible says you shouldn't have alcohol at all. To me, it's a matter of wisdom, and as is probably overwhelmingly 99% of the decisions that we make. They're issues of wisdom, not necessarily right and wrong. All that to say, we can agree it is a sin to get drunk. And so that's very clear. Medium tension in society. Medium tension in society. Have a stand on things, but not a crazy stand, right? Any thoughts on that one? Can you think of anything else that maybe not Christianity, but any group holds that is an issue, but not like a crazy strict issue? Yep. I'm going to be honest, I really don't know. Because it's one of those deals where the people I knew growing up that were Baptist, that didn't allow dancing, were fundamentalist. They were part of the fundamental Baptist movement, which is not Southern Baptist. Southern Baptists get a bad rap for a lot of things that I think a lot of the times are actually fundamentalist issues, not Southern Baptist issues. I had a grandmother who I love very much that used to loathe dancing and used to call the TV the tool of the devil, which, it's probably not all that wrong, all while smoking and drinking. It's a very confusing witness for me growing up. Could not understand what Grandma had against drinking or dancing when she did some of the other things that she did, but who knows? Yeah.
I came from a fundamental Baptist
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
It's because it's sexual.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't swim either. You couldn't go swimming. You couldn't have mixed swimming.
Yeah. Mixed swimming of the devil.
Swimming and dancing you didn't do.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is like the ultimately worst form of teaching healthy sexuality. It's very bad. It's very destructive. Yeah. I was actually baptized in a fundamentalist Baptist church when I was 9 years old. Someone prayed a prayer of faith for me, which is not how it's supposed to be done. And then I got baptized, and I had no real idea what was happening. And it clearly didn't take, as evidenced by the next 12 years of my life. Yeah, praying the prayer, so he's asking, explain praying the prayer for you as opposed to with you. So as a 9-year-old, someone sat down and said, if you'll just kind of nod in agreement with my prayer, then it'll be like your prayer. And then they went along and prayed this prayer. Now, let me just say, too, and this is going to be very controversial, and I'm sorry, but it's just kind of is what it is. Name a chapter and verse where it says you have to pray a prayer in order to be saved. It's not there. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I think that's the method by which we express to God our brokenness and desire for repentance and all that stuff. So I'm not saying that that's not a practice, but I think there is a lot of emphasis put on this practice that is not well explained. Being born again is a spiritual act brought on by the Holy Spirit, not us. The praying and confessing and repenting is the result of the work of God in our lives. So to say, if you'll just agree with these things while I pray this prayer, bypasses a lot of really important spiritual activity that needs to happen in order for any of this to make sense, in order for any of it to matter. And then subsequently being baptized holds no value if there's no real born-again change, if you understand what I'm saying. We've gotten away from, and this is a weird thing, we've gotten away from saying born again. I've noticed that in the Southern Baptist movement, really just in a lot of evangelical movement, born again is a term you rarely hear. In fact, at one time, it was equated with like sort of the radical Christians, you know? Like, I'm a Christian, I'm not just one of those born again Christians. I've heard someone literally say that. You can't be a Christian if you haven't been born again. That's literally what Jesus tells Nicodemus. One must be born from above, from a water spirit birth, if they're going to be admitted into the kingdom of God. And so the new birth, as it were, in the Scripture is something that is fundamental to actual saving faith. That makes sense? Does that sufficiently answer your question? Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, and so hear me when I say this. I mean, how will they believe if no one proclaims? How will they believe if they don't hear? How will they hear if no one, right? So, I mean, understand, yeah, the way God initiates faith and the believing of the gospel is through participation. I mean, this is how he does it with community. It's why he assigns to the church prophets, teachers, preachers, evangelists, so on and so forth. It's the building up and the equipping of the saints. Part of building up the church means adding numbers. That's why when Peter preaches in the book of Acts, 3,000 and then 5,000 come to faith. They came to faith because Peter preached and they heard. But then something else happened there. The Holy Spirit moved in their life in such a way that they were changed. They were born again. He wrought new life within them. And so it feels like, and every one of you who have had this experience of being born again, you had a moment in which things became clear to you such that you repented of your sin and confessed Jesus as Lord. But what I want you to understand is that apart from the work of God in your life, according to Ephesians chapter 1, Ephesians chapter 2, Romans chapter 3, and the list goes on, you could not do those things apart from the work of the Holy Spirit in your life. So yeah, there is a participation aspect of that, and I'm not against, I've sat there with people who have prayed this prayer of repentance and confession, and you know, this is part of leading someone to faith, and it's a beautiful process. It's an incredibly wonderful, honorable thing to be able to be a part of. There's been several moments right here in these seats where people have done that, and I have always thanked God to be used in some small way and to be a part of that wonderful moment for those people. But just to take a kid out of the pews and say, hey, if you'll just agree with this prayer, then you'll be saved, and then we can baptize you, is you're going to be hard-pressed to make a biblical case for that. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? It's a little off the beaten path, but it's good. I like it.
Well, then you get into sanctification, and then you're in 1 John.
Right.
Continually confessing.
Yes. Exactly. And the fruit of salvation. You know, this is the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, there are all kinds of other things that lead after that, none of which I possessed as a 9-year-old and on. Yeah. No, yeah. The question is, people who have babies baptized. Now, this gets into definitely a topic that we don't have time to cover tonight, but understand that the definition of infant baptism is a complex one. Because again, depending upon the denomination that we're talking about, is going to greatly differ that definition. Roman Catholics teach an infant baptism that removes original sin. It's a very different definition than, let's say, our Presbyterian brothers, who practice it for covenantal reasons, but that doesn't save the child. It endows grace and special blessings, and it's a very, when you ask for a definition of the purpose of infant baptism, depending on the Presbyterian, you're going to get some different answers, but it's not to save. So yeah, that. Yeah, well, and what we would say to that in our confession is you were sprinkled with water, but you weren't really baptized any more than someone swimming is baptized. Baptizo, by the way, the Greek word, it's a word that was used often in the naval arena to talk about a sunk ship, something that goes completely underwater. So that's what helps somewhat develop our mode of baptism. Not to mention, Jesus is baptized in a river, which seems a very weird practice to get all the way in a river and then just lightly sprinkle water. But, it is what it is. Early church text, like the Didache, prescribe a fully immersed baptism in living water, so a river as well. There's a lot that could be said about that, but yeah, we would say that if you were in our confession baptized as a baby, you need to be baptized not again, you need to be baptized for the first time. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Right.
But in England, when I lived there, the gentry finally got to the place where they didn't want to be baptized with the unwashed.
Yep.
Sprinkling.
Yeah. Well, and most people don't realize this, but Jewish people baptized prior to Jesus. It's why Jesus was baptized. We like to point to that as like the first baptism, or we treat it like that. It wasn't. No one ever questions why when Jesus is asking to be baptized, why didn't anyone go, well, what is that, Jesus? It's because they knew what it was, because they practiced it. It was a part of ritual in Judaism for a very, very long time. So the whole covenant connection, this is what our Reformed brothers would say, is that baptism is the New Testament version of Old Testament circumcision. And you circumcise a child on its 8th day, so you baptize a baby when it's a baby. Of course, the issues with that is that while circumcision was taking place, so was baptism. So that seems like a weird jump when they were both in existence together. And 2, you can only circumcise boys. Yet, we baptize both boys and girls. So, a lot more to that discussion than we have time for, but yeah, that's a little bit why. Any other thoughts? This is good. Waking up a little. I like it. Keeping me on my toes. Number 4. A group will succeed if it has a legitimate leader with adequate authority. A legitimate leader with adequate authority. Now, we talked about last time, obviously, a living prophet called by God. So this is going to kind of fit that definition. But let's just say for a moment that you you move to another city or something, and you find another church, not as charming, city on a hill, but it'll do, right? And so you go in, and let's say that the leader just sort of fumbles around and crosstalks himself and says things that are not even in line with each other, and half the people in the room are like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't even know why we're here. We've just always gone here since I was a kid, but we don't even like this guy. We don't trust anything he says. That group's not going to live for very long, right? They don't have a legitimate leader with adequate authority. Now, if you come into a room and you have someone who is very educated, very seasoned, he has strong buy-in from the majority of his community, then you're still maybe not going to just go all in on it, but you're certainly not going to question the validity of the group. You're going to at least recognize that, there's something going on here. Everyone has, an interest in what this guy is saying, and he seems like a credible person. He doesn't have any weird things going on, like a nose ring or something like that. They have a legitimate leader with adequate authority. Or handlebars on their pulpit, right. Exactly. Nothing weird like that. Number 5. Ooh, this is a good one, because this includes you. You're involved in this one. If they have a highly motivated volunteer labor force willing to proselytize. A highly motivated, and I don't know about that. We have to motivate you quite a bit. A highly motivated volunteer labor force that is willing to proselytize. In other words, a group needs to have a volunteer group of people that will grow in order for them to succeed. In order for them to succeed, they have to grow. In order to grow, they have to have people willing to proselytize other people to join them. And this all needs to be done for free, or mostly for free, because as you know, as we say in the South, money don't grow on trees, right? You can't just pay these people to show up and do the work. It has to be an inspired group, one that is highly motivated to carry out this kind of task. Now, how do you motivate people? Guilt, that's a big one. Guilt is a strong motivator. It's not a great one, but it's a strong one. What? Snacks. That'll motivate me, I'm not going to lie. It motivates my kids. Fear is a big one. What was that, Connie? Oh, snacks. I'm all for the snacks, man. Yeah. Say again? Eternal reward. Now we're talking. What if you say this? What if you say you get eternal reward if you show up, but you lose eternal reward? In fact, you gain eternal punishment if you don't show up. Yeah. You know, this is one of the difficulties. This is one of the difficulties with a free grace message. We trust fully the Holy Spirit to motivate you to do the work. We have to. You know, if we were a part of the LDS movement, we could just attach it to our theology and say, look, you don't go to heaven if you don't do these things. Guy, you got to go on a 2-year mission. That's just all there is to it. We own you for 2 years. You go and proselytize the world. You had better be here serving because you are gaining credibility and entrance into the kingdom or kingdoms, depending on how well you do. That's a powerful motivator. One of the things that actually split the Roman Empire was a debate or a conflict between the emperor and the pope, the bishop of Rome. And the conflict was over installing a particular individual into power. And so the emperor was obviously taken aback by this challenge from the Catholic Church, the audacity to challenge the emperor. And so he threatened to remove him from the position of pope. He threatened all kinds of things, to which the pope just threatened to remove him from the kingdom of God. Guess who won that fight? Yeah. The Holy Roman Empire is born out of this debate. And suddenly the people saw pretty clearly who the true authority was in Rome. It wasn't the emperor. When you can dangle eternity in front of someone, you can motivate them to do a lot of things. You can motivate them to do a lot of things. If you dangle particular promises of health and prosperity, you can motivate a lot of people to give a lot of money to your cause, which is particularly helpful in growing and succeeding. Money. We had a pastor this week contact us from the area, the local area, small church, bivocational pastor who could not pay his mortgage this month. He got COVID-19. He was out for 3 weeks, and his church is a small church, about 50 people. Just didn't have the money to give to support him. And so he'd already been given a good sum of money from another nonprofit organization, but it didn't meet his full need. And so we helped him out with the rest of that. And that's a tough reality that a lot of churches are facing right now, a lot of pastors are facing. We are very fortunate here at City on a Hill that we have stewarded the money the way we have to not have to worry about that in this moment. It doesn't last forever, and as you guys have been aware, if you've been in church or watching the messages online, we did a message several weeks ago now about giving in our Tough Issues series, and we told you guys that we are currently sitting at over $100,000 in deficit from our annual budget. We are actually right now, this is breaking news, hot take right now. You're the first to hear this in City on a Hill. There's advantages to coming to my class. I want you to understand that. Those of you online as well. We are actually, so per our bylaws, we are required to put forth to you 2 elder candidates every year for affirmation to serve as an elder for 3 years. And we rotate 2 on and 2 off every year. So they're in a pattern that goes on and off every year. We also, in that same affirmation, ask you to affirm the next year's budget that we will be operating off of, that we craft together, that the elders look at and affirm or challenge, rework. It's kind of a process that we go through. We unveiled in that giving message that our new budget for 2021 is going to be somewhere to the tune of like $118,000 less than what it was this year, which is a substantial cut. It's a very, very large cut. It's a cut that we think is manageable. We can cut out a lot of things that we would normally do, but we're not going to do right now because of the pandemic and because our numbers are down, and just for a variety of reasons, we feel like we can achieve that. It will still require the church to give more than what we are currently giving. So it's not just to kind of meet us where we are. We're coming more than halfway, and then we're asking the body to please consider giving faithfully. And if you already are, then bless you, and we're very grateful for that. We made a resolution Monday as an elder body. We met over Zoom that we are not going to ask for these affirmations this year, at the end of this year. We're going to wait until the spring. And the reason for that is because our bylaws state that the church, it has to be put forth to the church. And the church ain't coming right now. And it just seems like a very cheap move to install 2 elders that like 30 people affirm. And so what we're doing is we're kind of going a little bit off of, I think good faith that the budget will be affirmed. We've done, I think, an above and beyond job of cutting it down, like I said, over almost $120,000. We're going to continue to spend as little as we can anyways right now because things are getting pretty bleak if you haven't figured that out. And so we have no idea really where this thing's going. But we're not going to ask for elder affirmations through the end of this year because it just doesn't seem like the right move. What we will say, for those of you in here and online, is if you have people that you feel like meet the qualifications of Titus and Timothy to be an elder, an overseer in the body, then please submit them to us. And we will begin compiling a list that way over the course of the next couple months. And then in the spring, hopefully once there's a vaccine and more people, more herd immunity and numbers are going down, then we'll roll that out in the spring for that particular year. It'll be the first time, I think, in the church's history where we will do an elder and budget affirmation twice in 1 year, because we'll do it again at the end of 2021 for 2022. So just for what it's worth, those are the kind of decisions and things that we think about and that we talk about, and that we take very seriously. We take this very seriously. We're an elder-led body. We believe in elder-led authority. We believe it's biblical. It's not a typical Southern Baptist thing, actually. Most Southern Baptist churches do not have an elder body like we do, but we believe it's biblical, and we're biblical first and Southern Baptist second, and thank God for that. And we want to take it seriously. And we don't want to install someone with a lot of authority and oversight of this body without feeling like you had ample time and exposure to these candidates to then affirm them. So I don't know how I got there. Highly motivated volunteer labor force, willing to proselytize. This is a challenging one though for us, because in a free grace message where God is involved in every level of conversion, then all we're left to is to trust that when we do our part, God will do His. And for 2,000 years, that's worked. So, seems like a good idea to keep doing it that way. But it's difficult, and it's one of the things that certain cults have a distinct advantage in terms of growth, is they can put a lot more on the line for people and motivate people a lot more. It's not good motivation. It's, in fact, very unhealthy motivation, but it looks like on the surface that it works because the numbers are there, the money's there, the participation is there, because it has to be there, otherwise you go to hell. Any thoughts, questions, concerns on that one? All right, good. Number 6, and this is going to seem like you're going to be like, was someone really paid to put this list together? Yeah. If their membership birth rate offsets their death rate. If their membership birth rate offsets their death rate. If you're dying more than you're growing, your group is not going to succeed. It's just the way it goes, right? Now, as an extension to this one, here's what this means. A cult group will not be successful if they outright forbid sex. If you say, like, you can no longer have sex, have any sort of sexual activity in this cult, your group is not going to do well because you're not going to have any kids. You are depending fully upon proselytizing other people. Plus, you're getting them to commit to something that, let's be honest, probably not very realistic. Sex is like the number one selling thing in our society. Having someone abandon that, very high cultural capital as well. And cults as well. Yes, it's a big deal. It's a big part of cults. We're going to find that out in virtually every one of them we talk about. So that's what that means. Your groups who, so for example, again, I don't want to give away too much because we're going to talk about them. We'll commit a whole class, if not 2 classes, to them. Mormonism has a deep and rich theology when it comes to child rearing, because you are pulling down spirit babies from heaven into human vessels, and you get eternal rewards for that. More kids you have, more rewards you get. That's why Mormon families are typically very big, because it's in their theology. It's woven into the theology of what they believe. Groups that do not do this, Jonestown, for example, Jim Jones said, if you join my group, you no longer can have your wife. You have to give your wife to me, and you can never have sex with her again. People join this group. I mean, what were they thinking? It's kind of insane to me. It's sickening to me. But this was never going to work long term, because a group has to have a birth rate that will surpass its death rate. Any questions on that one? Interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this again, I hope I'm not giving too much ammunition away, but I'll say it again, you'll forget half of it. It'll be probably like 6 months before we get to it, knowing the way this class is going. Polygamy was formed in Mormonism. I'll say a lot more about this and give you some sources to back this up when we get there, but it was formed in Mormonism because of procreative reasons, or this is what was kind of put out there, right? Procreative reasons. We need to have more kids. We're a group under intense persecution, so we need to be able to have multiple wives. So Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, had a lot of wives, like to the tune of in the 30s, right? Lots of wives, because procreation matters, right? It's part of theology. Anyone want to take a guess at how many kids Joseph Smith had? How many? 400. That's a lot of kids. 100, 150. Less than 10. You really think that it was for procreative reasons? No. Joseph Smith was probably a sex addict. Let's just be honest. And in fact, most modern scholars consider him this. There's actually one scholar who's done a substantial amount of work on him, on his life, and the particular physician that followed him around, and all of the evidence from first-hand sources from this guy point to that he was likely performing a lot of abortions on women that were subsequently wives of Joseph Smith as well. So, yeah, there's a lot more to that story than what is probably on the surface. But all that to say, this was what was put out there, procreative reasons. Now, some of the people after that, Brigham Young, some of the people after him did legitimately have a lot of kids, and they were a group under persecution for a variety of reasons. Namely, they were performing illegal activities like polygamy in the United States that had outlawed that. And they were sleeping with a lot of young women who had dads that weren't particularly happy about it. But that was the reason that they put forth. Birth rate needs to offset death rate. Thoughts, concerns, questions on that? Let's look at that online. I haven't looked at that in a minute. They were being so quiet that, it's like at some point. Let's see here. And still nothing, see? Well, if you have a question, see here, question on that. What about the shaker? What about the Shakers? Significant attrition rate, of course, but still got some followers. Sarah, that's a good question. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't really know how to answer that question. I will mark that down, and I will address that in a later session. I don't want to say something that is not correct on that one. That's a good question. Okay, let me get back to it. Yeah, it is. Number 8. This is a good one too. A group will succeed if they have strong internal attachments with an open social network. Let me explain what I mean by that. Strong internal attachments with an open social network. A group needs to have within it strong, intimate relationships. What we would call in the church what? Fellowship. We like that word. Fellowship, Christian fellowship, intimate relationships. We need to have that, right? That's an important aspect, and that's something that the church has historically done incredibly well, right? The one another's of the New Testament. You've heard us talk about that a lot. This is a big part of the Christian life, is that we have this belief built into us because of our text that says that the body of Christ is just that, body. We are one unit. We have multiple purposes because everybody has multiple members of that body. And that when we all work in tandem together, the body gets the most done the most effectively. If you've got a thumb trying to do the job of an eye, not going to work very well, right? But when everyone is doing what they were gifted and made to do in unity together, in harmony together, everything works really well. Part of what that means is not just doing the work of the ministry together, but loving one another and bearing one another's burdens and caring for one another. Something that I will just say, again, personally to many of you who are in this room and online, my wife and I have felt a great deal of over this last week. And it's one of the reasons why we promote so heavily being in groups in this church in varieties of ways. It doesn't just happen in life group like it used to. It happens in a lot of our groups. Freedom groups in particular are a big one. But be in community. Be in community, because when life happens, someone needs to care about it. That's the internal attachment, strong internal attachment. But on the other hand, there are some cult groups that have incredibly strong internal attachments. But once you're in the group, you have no outside contact with non-members. No open social network. In fact, closed social network. Members and non-members are not allowed to speak. If you are a non-member, you do not get to talk to members anymore. If you are a member, you do not get to talk to non-members. A group will fail more often than not if this is true. Now, there are some groups, on the other hand, that will allow open, they're all about open social network, but there's no real internal attachments either, right? So, think about non-religious groups. Think about like fantasy football leagues, book clubs, just random social groups, nothing innately good or bad about them, just social clubs of some kind where members and non-members alike are fine, but there's no real strong internal attachments. You may not hear from Joe for 6 months in fantasy football, and you don't even think about Joe. You've kind of forgotten about Joe, actually. Oh, yeah, that guy that I played fantasy football with. So those are not really successful either. They're not going to have long-standing growth to them, at least for those reasons, because those reasons are not there. Thoughts on that one? So the successful cults are ones that have this strong internal attachment, but that also are fully open to having dinner at your aunt and uncle's house who are not a part of your group. In fact, they promote it. Go and tell aunt and uncle about this group. Maybe they'll join. Number 9, a group will be successful if they allow people to come and go as they please. So, again, pretty self-explanatory, I think, but if you are so controlled by the group that you are a part of that you are not allowed to go to certain places or do certain things, and if you are not where you are supposed to be at all times, there will be consequences for that. You are in a cult, or the military, which is incidentally not a cult. This is a big one. There are people that come to our church once every 3 or 4 weeks. There are people who are here every single Sunday and Wednesdays. Bless your hearts. And that's kind of the beauty, again, of a free grace message, is that we will say things to you like what? You have to be accountable for yourself before God. Now, we want you here. If you've committed to being here to volunteer for something, we expect you to be here. But we're not controlling in that way. If you stop coming, we're going to call you. We're going to find out why, hopefully, if you're, again, involved in the life of the body here. I try, and I haven't done a great job of this class as it's met once, and I have a roster that I'm working with still, but I try to message most of you each week to let you know that we're meeting because I care, because I realize your life is busy and sometimes you forget. By the way, I got to tell you this. I'm in a reading seminar, PhD reading seminar right now as part of my master's degree I'm doing, and the Tuesday that I got the positive test result for COVID, over 2 weeks ago now, was the sickest I was. That was like that second day probably. Temp got up to 104 a couple times, and it was really, really rough, really, really rough. And I had a reading seminar that morning at 11:30 that I totally forgot about. Like it wasn't even on my radar, obviously. And I messaged my professor that evening, and the other guy that's in that particular group. It's just 3 of us. It's a small group. So like if you're missing, I'm 1/3 of the group, and it's pretty noticeable. And so I messaged them and said, I am very, very sorry. But they had emailed me at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Not because I was in trouble for missing it, but they were just like, hey, man, we were just hoping you're okay. Wanted to check in with you. It was very unusual for me to not be in the group. In fact, I had not missed a class up to that point. And so there's a care that goes into shepherding people, and I'm fortunate enough to experience it at a seminary level as well. Southwestern, that's one thing I will say about Southwestern that is really above and beyond, is the professors I've had for the most part have been incredible shepherds of people. A lot of them have been former pastors or interim pastors at the current moment. And that's a good thing when you're cared for. On the other hand, if there is fear of what will happen to you if you're not there, that's a different discussion that we're talking about now. Not a good one. Less successful. Any questions on that? We've got one more, which is pretty spot on because we have about 11 minutes left. Number 10. A group will succeed if they socialize their young to prevent defection. To prevent defection, they will socialize their young. What do we mean by that? What are ways we do this in the church? Sunday school, vacation Bible school, Disciple Now, summer camps. There's a variety of things that churches do, different methodologies, but all kind of the same idea. Create experiences for young people where they develop an identity in that group that is very strong and difficult to walk away from. Now, the hope is that they develop the identity for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. And the hope is that they develop the right identity. The wrong identity can also be built, and that's a dangerous thing. There was a study that was done about 6 years ago now on megachurches, particularly youth groups of megachurches, where the youth group had such numbers, because it was a megachurch, that it had its own name, which is pretty typical. Most youth groups have kind of their own sort of kitschy youth group name. But they had their own facility. They had their own stage. They had their own sermons. They would do their baptisms in that room, in that mega. It was like a church service designed for students. They're usually big. There's hundreds of kids. They got a rockin' band. They've got a really cool youth pastor, right? I mean, the whole thing is just, this is what parents look for. I want a strong youth group. What they mean is they want money in their youth group. They want it to be polished and well done. Forget about discipleship. They're getting discipleship because they're in this awesome room. And this awesome stuff is happening. And they got baptized there by the youth pastor, and it was awesome. But here's what started happening, is when these kids were interviewed and asked, what church do you attend? They would go, the Crave, or the Hot Spot, or whatever it is, right? Some name, right? It was never the church's name. It was always the youth group's name. Now, that sounds pretty innocent. Like, what's the wrong with that? They love their youth group. Well, what happens when you graduate high school? You just graduated church. You don't belong there anymore. And so, all of a sudden, these kids who have been going to this same building, with the same pastor, with the same worship team, for 6 and 7, 8 years, graduate, and they're no longer welcome in that room. Maybe a couple of them get recruited to leadership for another year or two, but they're expected, in addition to leadership, to go to actual church, which for them, they've never been to before. It's that other building their parents have gone to for all these years. So they show up to big church, and everything is different, and the music is different, and the pastor's not as cool and funny, and everything just feels like, this isn't my church. Well, but it is your church. You just have never been to it. You've only ever been to the youth group. So we can develop identities in young people really well in evangelicalism. The question is, are we developing the right identities in children? Is it the right message that we're sending them? This is one of the reasons why we have always tried, and it's difficult, but we have always counseled parents as well, bring your kids to first service. Bring them to church. Have them sit, bored out of their minds if they are, in the seats and listen to the pastors and the worship and see you worshiping and see you paying attention. Be a part of this, because one day this is what they're going to have. And the hope is that it'll be good enough for them to stay. And it will be, even if it's great here, foreign, completely foreign to them, and that will present a lot of problems. Make sense? They socialize their young to prevent defection. Now, how do a lot of cult groups do this? It's not through big banging youth groups. It's through family devotions. The most successful cult groups do these things together as a family regularly. I made a joke in here a few weeks ago, and there's a reason why this is the case. I made the case, or the statement, that every Mormon I have ever known plays piano. Every one of them. Any former Mormons in here? No? I'm just wondering if the case is still there. I've known, a lot of Mormons actually through the years, and every one of them play piano. And I could, is this like some sort of indoctrination thing you guys do as a part of your, is this something you have to learn? It's not. You know what it is? It's because every week the family gets together around a piano where one of the parents plays hymns and they sing together, they worship together before they do their lesson together as a family. And eventually kids go, I want to learn to play, so I can lead the song for family devotion, and they learn. There's really something said about that. Now that's important, and it's valuable for a couple reasons. One, it develops at least a different kind of identity, one that is focused more around the source material and not some big fancy experience. But number two, it draws the family together. It makes family matter to these young people. And that is another thing I will say that is very true. Every single person I have known, my age or younger, that is a Mormon, loves their families, loves them, because they've spent a lot of time together. Something that we could take notes from, I think, as true believers. Questions, concerns, thoughts, existential crises? So here's what's going to happen. Questions online. Oh, let's look. Let's see. Let's see what we got. Come on. Come on, buddy. I'm not seeing any more questions, Kelsey. Is that just my computer or iPad? Let me close it out. Hold on. Yeah, I'm not. I'll come back and answer them at the end if I missed you. Sorry, I'm not seeing anything new on here. So next week, we will jump into the second portion of our class, is where we'll be spending most of our time, which is just looking at individual cult groups, their founding, how they started, their core beliefs, and who they are today, where they are today. We're going to start with one that is not as big, actually. I'm going to wait on LDS and Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, because I've got a few ladies in Fearless series right now that are finishing up that group that really want to be a part of those groups. They want to hear, because they have family or friends that are a part of those groups. And so I don't have to do those first. I can choose whatever order I do this in, because I'm putting it together. So the rules are made by me. So I think next week what we're going to do is we're going to start with a group that I actually explained last class was almost a part of. Was introduced to by a friend right when Jessica and I were engaged and maybe even married. I don't remember if we were married yet or not, but I think we were. And would have joined if not for the wisdom and discernment of my wife, and that is the Way International. The Way International. Think of them as charismatic Jehovah's Witnesses, if you can imagine that. So we'll talk about that next week. I will just say this up front, assuming that nothing changes, this is what we'll do. And those of you who come, I'll be honest with you, I am shocked and blessed that as many of you came tonight as did. I fully expected there to be like 3 people here. So thank you for being a part of tonight, and we will do this next week, assuming nothing changes. If something changes and things get way worse, or we're having to lock down because of county issues or whatever, then I'll certainly communicate that with you. So be looking at the church Facebook page. If you're not following that or liked that or whatever, then do that, and we'll make you aware of that ahead of time. Yes, Vanessa? Next week is Thanksgiving. Oh, see, this is here we go again. So do we meet or do we not meet? Not allowed to see your families. You make a compelling point, Brittany. Can always count on Florida be way off the rails. I love it. All right, well, I'm trying to decide. I don't think I'm going to be traveling anywhere. I don't think. Should we meet, Emma? Are you going to have childcare next week? You're not going to have childcare next week. Does that matter? Anyone have childcare kids in childcare tonight, other than Brittany? Can you make that work, Brittany? Oh, well, there you go. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's say this. We will tentatively plan on meeting. I need to ask my sweet little wife to make sure that we don't have any like weird family plans that I'm unaware of. I don't know what they would be, but then again, my wife's family is very unpredictable. So we'll say tentatively yes. We'll go ahead and do that because I almost didn't meet tonight because I was thinking we wouldn't meet next week, and I didn't want to come one off and then have another week off. So we'll say tentatively we will meet next week, and we'll just roll with it. The Way International is where we'll be. God bless you all. We will see you then.